At my graduation dinner, Grandma Margaret smiled and said she was glad the $1,650 she sent me every month had helped. When I said I had never received a dollar, the room went silent. My sister stopped chewing, my father's champagne glass froze midair, and everyone slowly turned toward my parents. My grandmother said it the way she said most things that mattered. Warmly. Without ceremony. She leaned forward in the candlelight with both hands around her water glass and smiled at me like she was letting the whole table share a private pride. I'm just so glad the $1,650 I send you every month has been helping, Jake. The restaurant did not go silent all at once. That is not how silence works when something breaks in public. It thinned first. The laughter from my aunt's end of the table kept going for half a second too long. A server behind me was describing the dessert special to another family. Silverware touched a plate somewhere. My cousin Miles coughed once and then stopped. Natalie's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My father had lifted his champagne glass, already wearing the expression of a man preparing to receive credit for a good son. The glass never reached his lips. My mother looked at the centerpiece. Not at me. Not at Grandma Margaret. At the flowers between the bread basket and the candles, as if the answer to whatever had just happened might be arranged inside white roses and eucalyptus. I looked at my grandmother. Margaret Ellis was 79 years old and had never, in my entire life, said anything casually when money was involved. She balanced her checkbook in pen. She saved receipts from grocery stores. She labeled Christmas envelopes by hand and wrote the purpose on the memo line of every check. If Grandma said she had been sending money, she had been sending money. Grandma, I said. My voice came out even. I still do not know how. I never got that money. One beat. Then another. My father said, Jake. I never got it, I said again. Still looking at my grandmother. Her face changed in front of me. Warmth first, then confusion, then something sharper and slower. The expression of a woman beginning to understand she had walked into a room that had existed without her knowledge. What do you mean you never got it? She asked. I mean exactly that. I had worked 2 jobs through 4 years of college. I had slept in computer labs, eaten vending machine dinners, and counted bus fare in coins while $1,650 a month was apparently being sent for me. I knew where it had gone. By then, I had the binder in my bag. Black cover, color-coded tabs, timestamps, account numbers, receipts, 3 printed copies of everything my parents thought had disappeared into family memory. But that was for later. Right then, there was only the table, the candlelight, my grandmother's face, and my parents sitting across from me with the specific kind of silence that belongs to people who have just been caught. My name is Jacob Mercer, but everyone who knows me calls me Jake. I am 23 years old, and I graduated on a Tuesday with a degree in accounting and finance from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with a 3.78 GPA. I am telling you that number because achievement without context is just decoration. People hear GPA and degree and graduation dinner, and they imagine a clean story. They imagine parents smiling in photos, a grandmother proud in the corner, a family clapping for the finish line because everyone understands what it took to get there. That is not the story I lived. I got that degree in pieces. Library shifts, diner shifts, bus rides in the dark, notes reviewed at 2:30 in the morning while my feet hurt too much to sleep, papers written on borrowed time and borrowed computers, meals skipped because the math came out cleaner without them. So when my grandmother mentioned $1,650 a month, the room heard a mistake. I heard 4 years rearranging themselves. I grew up in Elmhurst, Illinois, in a house that looked stable from the sidewalk. 4 bedrooms, brick front, maple tree in the yard, a two-car garage with bikes hanging from hooks and plastic storage bins labeled by season. The kind of house people point to when they want proof that a family has done things correctly. My father, Alan Mercer, was a regional operations manager for a medical logistics company. He had the voice of a man used to solving problems by assigning them to someone else and calling that leadership. My mother, Denise, taught part-time at a community college and managed the household finances. At least that was what I thought she was doing. She kept folders, paid bills early, balanced statements at the kitchen table with a cup of herbal tea and the particular calm of someone who believed organization was the same thing as honesty. I believed that too. For a long time. My sister Natalie is 3 years older than me, and in our house, she existed under a different weather system. When Natalie struggled, the family adjusted. When Natalie needed help, help appeared. When Natalie was overwhelmed, people lowered their voices and made space around her. When I struggled, my father called it training. Struggle makes a man, he used to say. He said it when I was 15 and asked for money to replace cleats that had split at the side. He said it when I needed help paying for a school trip. He said it when I started working weekends and came home too tired to talk at dinner. There was always a lesson attached to my lack. Discipline. Grit. Self-reliance. My mother's version was softer, which made it harder to recognize. Disappointment builds perspective, she would say, touching my shoulder like she was giving me something useful instead of taking something away. I wanted to believe them. That is what children do when the alternative is understanding too early that fairness is not malfunctioning in your house. It is being selectively applied. Natalie's emergencies were emergencies. Mine were opportunities for character. If she needed money, it was because she was in a hard season. If I needed money, it was because I had failed to plan. If she cried, everyone moved toward her. If I went quiet, everyone assumed I was handling it. By the time I left for college, I had already learned the family rule. Natalie needed support. I needed to become stronger. My parents called that parenting. Later, I would learn it had another name. Accounting. Natalie was the kind of child my parents worried about out loud. I was the kind they assumed would figure it out. That difference sounds small until you watch it become money. When Natalie applied to graduate certificate programs, my parents paid the application fees because she was trying to move forward. When I applied for internships that required travel, my father told me to be strategic and choose opportunities one could afford to reach. Natalie's apartment deposit was covered after she said the leasing office needed it immediately, and she was overwhelmed. I paid my first security deposit with 2 months of library wages and diner tips I had kept folded in a coffee can under my bed. Natalie got help with a used Subaru because my mother said she needed reliable transportation. I drove a 12-year-old Civic with a heater that worked only when it felt respected. When my winter coat split at the seam freshman year, I wore a hoodie under it until February, then bought a replacement from a clearance rack with sleeves slightly too short. My father saw it over winter break and said, "That's how you learn value." The next month, Natalie went on a ski trip to Breckenridge because, according to my mother, she needed something positive after a difficult semester. Nobody in my family ever sat me down and said Natalie mattered more. They did not have to. The bank statements would say it later. Application fees, apartment deposit, Subaru down payment, ski trip, credit card payoff. All of it blew in the binder. All of it pulled from a stream of money my grandmother had labeled for me. I had spent years thinking I was learning discipline. Natalie was learning that rescue arrived when she called for it. I was learning not to call. I took my first campus job during the second week of freshman year. The library needed evening staff, shelving, circulation desk, closing procedures, The quiet work that happens after everyone else has decided the day is over. I liked it more than I expected. There was order in it. Books went where they belonged. Records matched locations. A person could make a mistake, fix it, and leave the system cleaner than he found it. That appealed to me, maybe because home had taught me early that not every system worked that way. I worked 4 evenings a week. Most nights, I stayed until midnight. The second job came in November, when I finally admitted the math was not going to fix itself. Miller's Table was a 24-hour diner 6 blocks off campus, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths, coffee that tasted burned after 10 p.m., and regulars who knew exactly how much they were going to tip before they sat down. I took whatever shifts they would give me. Mostly 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Sometimes later if someone called out. The library shift ended. I changed shirts in a restroom stall, walked through the cold with my backpack digging into one shoulder, and served eggs, burgers, coffee, pancakes, and fries to people whose nights were ending while mine was splitting open into another shift. I learned to move fast without looking rushed. I learned which tables wanted conversation and which wanted the check before the plate was empty. I learned that tiredness has layers. There is tired where you want to sleep. Then there is tired where your body keeps moving because stopping would require more permission than you have. After closing, I walked back under orange streetlights with tip money in my pocket, mostly 1s and 5s, sometimes a 10 folded into the stack like a miracle I was not supposed to rely on. In my dorm room, I sorted the cash on my desk. Groceries. Bus fare. Phone bill. Laundry. Whatever was left went into an envelope marked books, even though books always cost more than the envelope ever managed to hold. Then I opened my laptop and studied. Accounting problems, finance chapters, spreadsheets, notes from lectures I had fought to stay awake through. I did not think of myself as suffering. That would have sounded too dramatic, and I had been trained to distrust drama in myself. I thought I was becoming disciplined. I thought I was doing what men in my family were supposed to do. Absorb pressure. Keep working. Need less. I did not know that every month, on the 15th, $1,650 was arriving with my name attached to it. I only knew the money never reached me. I put back a bag of apples once. That is the detail that stayed. Not the double shifts. Not the textbooks I bought used with pages already highlighted by strangers. Not the winter mornings when I stood at the bus stop with my hands in my sleeves because my gloves had holes in the fingers. The apples. It was at a grocery store near campus on a Thursday night after a library shift and before Miller's Table. I had $23 and some change in my pocket, and I had already done the math 3 different ways while standing in the produce section. Bus fare for the next few days. Phone bill. A cheap pack of pasta. Peanut butter. The apples were $4.12. That was the gap. Not a symbolic gap, not a dramatic one. Exactly $4.12 between getting through the week and creating another problem I would have to solve while tired. So I put them back. I remember setting the bag down carefully, like if I was gentle with it, the moment would feel less embarrassing. Then I walked to the register with what I had decided I could afford. At the time, I told myself this was what my father meant. Struggle makes a man. I was 18 years old, doing survival math under fluorescent lights, believing I was being shaped into someone stronger. I was being shaped. Just not by the lesson they were selling. The laptop incident happened in November of my junior year. I still call it that in my head. The laptop incident. Like giving it a small title makes it smaller than it was. It died on a Wednesday afternoon between a corporate finance lecture and a closing shift at Miller's Table. No warning. No slow decline. The screen went black. The fan stopped. and the power button became a useless piece of plastic under my finger. Inside that machine were 3 years of notes, 2 spreadsheets for a group project, and a paper due in 4 days. I sat at the desk in my apartment staring at the blank screen for a long minute. Then I called my father. He answered on the 3rd ring with background noise behind him, the kind of clipped office sound that told me he was already deciding how much attention the call deserved. "What's going on?" "My laptop died," I said. "Completely. I've tried the charger, hard reset, everything. I have a paper due Sunday and project files I need for class." There was a pause. "Not concern. Assessment." "That's really a failure to plan situation, Jake." I remember looking at the dead laptop when he said it. A failure to plan. As if I had casually chosen not to maintain the machine that carried half my life. As if I had a history of calling him every time something became inconvenient. I had called my father for money twice in 3 years. The first time, he told me to be resourceful. The second time, he told me men who panic early stay dependent. So I had stopped calling. Until that Wednesday, when I genuinely could not see another option. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice flat because I knew any edge in it would become the subject instead of the problem. "I'm not asking for spending money. I need a working computer." "Computer labs," he said. "That's what they're for." He was not technically wrong. That was the part that made it worse. There were computer labs. There were public workstations. There were ways to survive without help if survival was the only standard anyone cared about. So I survived. I spent the next 48 hours in the basement computer lab under fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. I slept in 2-hour pieces with my backpack looped around my ankle. I ate vending machine crackers and drank coffee that tasted like burned metal. I rebuilt the spreadsheet from memory and rewrote the paper from notes I had printed because some part of me had learned to prepare for things breaking. I submitted it with 40 minutes to spare. It got a B+. At the time, I considered that a win. Later, in my father's banking history, I found the charge from that same week. A wine fridge. $429. Paid for 4 days after my grandmother's transfer arrived. The house sitting happened in March of senior year. My parents were going to Door County for a wine weekend, Thursday through Sunday, and they needed someone to collect the mail, water the plants, and make sure the house did not look empty. They asked me because I was close enough. Because I was responsible. Because asking me cost nothing. I said yes. That is another thing I have had to sit with since then, how quickly I said yes to people who had already taught me not to expect the same instinct back. I drove from Madison to Elmhurst on Thursday afternoon and let myself in with the key I had carried since high school. The house smelled the same. Lemon cleaner, coffee, the faint cedar scent from the hallway closet. Everything looked arranged, polished, waiting. A good family home from a distance. I watered the plants first. Then I brought in the mail. Then I carried my bag upstairs to my old room. Except it was not really my room anymore. My mother had turned it into a sewing room and overflow storage sometime during my sophomore year. There were clear plastic bins stacked against one wall, labeled Christmas, fabric, Natalie office, donate. A folding table sat where my bed used to be. The posters were gone. The bookshelf was gone. The old desk where I had filled out college applications was gone. In the closet, behind a box of wrapping paper, there was a folding cot. That was what remained for me. A cot. Something temporary. Something pulled out when needed and put away afterward. I stood there longer than I should have, holding my overnight bag in a room that had quietly learned to function better without me. Then I put my bag on the cot and went downstairs. The good printer was in my father's home office. That was why I opened the door. My father's home office always felt colder than the rest of the house. not temperature. Permission. It was the room where bills were paid, calls were taken, and decisions were made before anyone bothered explaining them to me. Dark wood desk, framed logistics awards on the wall, printer against the side cabinet, laptop open, screen still awake. I only went in to print one document. That is the truth. I had a form on my phone for a financial aid review meeting the following week, and my father's printer was the good one, the one that did not leave gray streaks across the page. I sent the file to print. Then I saw the laptop. My father had left it logged in. He always did that at home because convenience mattered more to him than caution, especially in a house where he believed everyone already knew their place. The browser window was open to his email, but the history drop-down was visible at the top. One line caught my eye. The banking portal for my parents' joint account. I did not click it immediately. I want that understood. I sat in his chair for several minutes with the printed document still warm in the tray, staring at a link I knew I probably had no right to open. But rights become complicated when you have spent 4 years being told there is no money, while your family keeps somehow finding money for wine weekends, Natalie's deposits, new appliances, and emergencies that never belonged to you. I thought about the apples, the dead laptop, the coat with sleeves too short, the way my mother looked at the centerpiece when Grandma mentioned the money. I had been building a version of my family's finances in my head for years without admitting it. Not suspicion exactly, more like numbers that refused to balance. So I clicked. The portal opened without a password. And at 9:14 on a Friday morning, sitting alone in my father's office, I stopped feeling like something was wrong. I started seeing it. The first deposit I saw was dated February 15th. $1,650. Sender, Margaret Ellis. Memo, for Jake's college expenses. I stared at that line longer than I stared at the balance. There are phrases that do not leave room for misunderstanding. That was one of them. Not family help, not household support, not general contribution. My name was in the memo line. My college expenses were in the memo line. My grandmother had written the purpose so clearly that even a stranger could have understood it. My parents understood it too. That was what the next line proved. 3 days after the deposit, there was a charge at Nordstrom for $520. 4 days after that, a steakhouse dinner downtown for $246. Then a transfer to Natalie. $750. I clicked backward through the months. March 15th. $1,650 from Margaret Ellis. Memo, for Jake's college expenses. 2 days later, a payment to a boutique hotel in Lake Geneva. Spa weekend package. $710. Then golf supplies. $340. Then another transfer to Natalie, labeled simply Nat Help. April 15th. $1,650. 5 days later, a furniture store charge. Then a wine bar. Then a credit card payment that did not belong to me. Month after month, the pattern repeated with a steadiness that made my stomach go cold. The money came in with my name attached. Then it left wearing someone else's comfort. I did not react quickly. That is important. I was not scrolling like a son snooping through his parents' account and looking for a reason to be angry. I was reading like an accounting student who knew that numbers have habits when people think nobody will ever line them up. And once I lined them up, they started speaking. The month my winter coat split at the seam, Grandma's money paid for Natalie's professional headshots and a dinner my parents described online as much needed. The week I worked 2 double shifts because rent was short, $600 moved into Natalie's account. The month I put back the apples, there was a $198 restaurant charge 2 days after Margaret's transfer. The week my laptop died, the $429 wine fridge appeared. That one stopped me. I clicked the transaction twice, like making it bigger on the screen would somehow make it less real. It did not. For days after my grandmother sent money for my education, my parents bought a wine fridge while I slept in a computer lab and ate crackers from a vending machine. That was the moment the story changed shape. Until then, some part of me had still been trying to leave room for error. Poor management, confusion, a messy account system. Maybe money moved around, and somehow, stupidly, nobody realized what it meant. But there were too many months. Too many charges. Too many transfers. This was not confusion. This was a system. And I had been funding it without knowing I had money to lose. I made the first list in the Notes app on my phone. Not because it was the best place for it. Because it was the only place I could put the information without letting the information take over my body. I sat in my father's office chair with both feet flat on the floor and started building categories. Green, deposits from Grandma Margaret. Pink, luxury spending. Blue, money moved to Natalie. Yellow, household expenses that my parents could have paid with their own income, but that landed inside the same billing cycle as Grandma's transfer and drained the account before anything ever reached me. I did not choose the colors for drama. I chose them because numbers stop being vague when you force them into structure. Green was the cleanest column. Every month, on or near the 15th, $1,650 came in from Margaret Ellis with the same kind of note. For Jake's college expenses. For Jake. My name, again and again, attached to money I had never seen. Pink was the column that made my jaw tighten. Restaurants, wine bars, Lake Geneva, Nordstrom, golf supplies. A hotel package my mother had once described as a quick reset weekend in a Facebook caption. Blue was worse in a different way. Natalie's account. Natalie's apartment deposit. Natalie's Subaru down payment. Natalie's credit card payoff. Natalie help. Nat emergency. Natalie move. The labels were casual in the way people are casual when they have convinced themselves the money already belongs to them. Yellow was harder to classify, but I kept it anyway. Utilities, insurance, groceries, repairs, things my parents would later try to call family expenses, things that may have been real bills, but were still covered by money my grandmother had designated for my education. Intent mattered. The memo lines mattered. The timing mattered. I checked the numbers once. Then again. Then a third time because I am the kind of person who would rather find my own mistake than hand someone else the pleasure of finding it for me. 48 months. $1,650 a month. $79,200. That number sat on the screen with no emotion attached to it. Numbers do that. They stand there clean while everything inside you gets ugly. For 4 years, my grandmother had been sending enough money to change my life. My parents had changed theirs with it instead. I did not confront anyone that morning. That would have been the easy version. The version people expect when they imagine betrayal. Raised voices. Accusations. A son standing in a doorway with a laptop open, demanding explanations from people who had spent years training him not to demand anything. I did something else. I printed the form I had originally come for. Then I logged out of the banking portal, closed my father's laptop, and drove to Walgreens. I bought a black binder, color-coded tab dividers, highlighters, printer paper, and 1 pack of the cheap pens with blue caps because the expensive ones felt too optimistic for the day I was having. The cashier asked if I found everything okay. I said yes. That was the strangest part. The world kept allowing normal sentences while the inside of my life had split open. I went back to my parents' house and printed everything I could access. Statements, deposit records, transfer confirmations, credit card payments, screenshots of memo lines, dates, amounts, descriptions. I made 3 copies because 1 copy can be misplaced, 2 copies can be disputed, and 3 copies starts to look less like panic and more like preparation. Green tabs for Grandma Margaret's deposits. Pink for luxury spending. Blue for Natalie. Yellow for household expenses my parents would eventually try to hide behind. By the time I was done, the binder was thick enough to have weight in my hands. That mattered. For 4 years, they had turned my suffering into a lesson. Now I had turned their lesson into evidence. The first person I called was Professor Helen Sato. She had been my academic advisor for 2 years and taught advanced financial accounting with the kind of precision that made sloppy thinking feel almost disrespectful. She was not warm in the easy way. She did not waste comfort on sentences that needed clarity. That was exactly why I trusted her. I called her from my parents' driveway on Saturday morning, the black binder sitting on the passenger seat beside me like another person in the car. "Professor Sato," I said when she answered, "I found something in my parents' bank records, and I need to understand what I'm looking at before I decide what to do." She did not ask me to summarize it over the phone. She did not tell me families are complicated. She said, "Come Monday at 9. Bring everything." So I did. Her office was on the 4th floor of the business school, narrow and bright, with stacked journals on one shelf and a whiteboard filled with accounting standards written in neat block letters. I sat across from her and placed the binder on her desk. Then I walked her through it. Slowly. Chronologically. I started with Grandma Margaret's deposits, the memo lines, the recurring dates, the amount, then the charges that followed, the pink tabs, the blue tabs, the yellow tabs, the month with the wine fridge, the month with Natalie's Subaru down payment, the month I put back the apples. Professor Sato did not interrupt. She took notes on a legal pad and turned each page like she was handling evidence, not family pain. That helped more than sympathy would have. When I finished, she sat back and looked at the summary sheet for a long time. "What you have documented," she said, "is not simply poor family budgeting." I said nothing. She tapped the memo line with the back of her pen. "These funds were designated for your educational expenses." Repeatedly, explicitly, the pattern after each deposit indicates redirection. My throat tightened, but my voice stayed level. "So I'm not reading this wrong." "No," she said. "You are reading it carefully." That sentence hit harder than I expected. She asked whether my grandmother had ever told me the money was meant for general family support. "No." "Did your parents ever tell you she was sending it?" "No." "Did any portion of it reach an account you controlled?" "No." She nodded once. Then the argument that this was a misunderstanding becomes difficult to sustain. Not impossible. Difficult. That was how Professor Sato spoke. She did not overstate. She did not hand me outrage to borrow. She gave the truth a frame strong enough to stand in. "This is a pattern of financial misconduct," she said. "Gift funds designated for your benefit were redirected without your knowledge." I looked at the binder. For 3 days, it had been proof that I was not crazy. In that office, it became something else. It became a record. Professor Sato looked from the binder to me. "What are you planning to do with this?" "I'm going to tell my grandmother first," I said. Her expression did not change, but something in the room settled. "She's the one who sent the money," I continued. She deserves to know what happened to it before anyone else gets a chance to explain it for her. Professor Sato nodded once. That is the correct order. I needed to hear that more than I wanted to admit. For days, I had been carrying the binder like it was both evidence and a weapon, and I did not want to become careless just because I was angry. Anger was easy. My father had spent my whole life teaching me that a man who showed too much of it could be dismissed as unstable. So I wanted the order clean. Grandma first. Then whatever came next. Professor Sato wrote 2 names on a yellow sticky note. One is a certified financial counselor, she said. The other is an attorney who has handled diverted family funds and estate matters. You may not need both, but you should understand your options before your parents start giving you theirs. I folded the note into my wallet. The binder had shown me what happened. Now I needed to decide who I trusted with the truth. Grandma Margaret lived in Evanston in a narrow brick house 2 blocks from the lake. She had bought it with my grandfather in 1978, back when the neighborhood was cheaper and the kitchen still had the original yellow tile she refused to replace because, according to her, not everything old needs rescuing. My grandfather had been gone for 12 years. She kept the house like he had just stepped out for stamps. His chair was still angled toward the window. His old fountain pen sat in a ceramic cup on the desk near the dining room. The garden was trimmed with the kind of patience only retired people and grieving people seem to have. When I arrived on Tuesday morning, she had tea ready. Not coffee. Tea. Grandma believed difficult conversations required a table, a hot drink, and enough silence for people to use their own words correctly. I stood in her kitchen doorway with the black binder under my arm, suddenly aware of how heavy it was. She looked at it. Then at me. What happened? She asked. No panic. No performance. Just the question. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and placed the binder between us. Grandma, I said, I need to show you where the money went. Her hand paused on the teapot. Only for a second. Then she set it down and folded both hands in front of her. Show me. So I did. I started with the green section because that was hers. Every transfer. Every 15th. $1,650. Memo line after memo line with my name written into the purpose. For Jake's college expenses. For Jake. For Jake. She read the first page carefully, then the second, then the third. Her reading glasses sat low on her nose, and her expression did not break, but the warmth in her face began moving into something else. I turned to the pink tabs. Nordstrom. Lake Geneva. Wine bars. Golf supplies. The wine fridge. I did not explain too much. I had learned from Professor Sato that clean evidence did not need a speech leaning on it. I gave dates. I gave amounts. I showed what came in and what went out. Then the blue section. Natalie's apartment deposit. Natalie's Subaru down payment. Natalie's credit card payoff. Nat help. Natalie move. Grandma's mouth tightened at those labels. Not because she disliked Natalie. Because she understood what it meant to see casual wording attached to redirected money. Then I showed her the summary page. 48 months. $79,200. Money she had sent for me while I worked 2 jobs and counted coins at grocery stores. She did not speak for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked above the doorway. Outside, a truck passed on the street, loud for 1 second and then gone. Finally, she turned 1 page back. It was the month my laptop died. The green deposit came in on the 15th. The wine fridge charge came 4 days later. Beside it, I had written, "Computer lab, 48 hours, paper submitted 40 minutes before deadline." Grandma read that note twice. Then she looked at the page with the apples. I had not meant to include that at first. It was not a bank transaction. It was not proof in the legal sense. But I had written it in the margin because some things are evidence even when they do not have receipts. Put back apples, $4.12 short. One tear fell from her face onto the saucer beneath her cup. That was the only sound she made. I did not comfort her immediately. Not because I did not want to. Because for once, someone else in my family was sitting with the full weight of what had happened to me, and I did not want to take it from her just because pain made the room uncomfortable. She closed the binder. Both hands rested on top of it. When she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "What do you want me to do?" I had prepared for that question. Not emotionally. No one prepares emotionally for a grandmother asking what to do after learning her own money had been used to teach her grandson how to go without. But practically, I had prepared. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and took out a folded napkin from the coffee shop near campus. On it, I had written the routing number and account number for a savings account I opened the previous Friday at a bank my parents had never used. My name only. $43 in it. That was all I had been able to move over without creating another problem somewhere else. I slid the napkin across the kitchen table. "Keep sending it," I said, "but change the account." Grandma Margaret looked at the napkin. Then she looked at me. For a second, I thought she might argue. Not because she wanted control, but because people her age sometimes feel responsible for fixing a wound all at once when they finally see how deep it is. She did not. She picked up the napkin, smoothed it flat with 2 fingers, and read the numbers carefully. "Is this yours alone?" "Yes." "No one else can access it?" "No one." She nodded. "Good." Then she reached for her phone. No speech. No dramatic promise. No trembling declaration that everything would be made right. Just the quiet efficiency of a woman who had spent 79 years understanding that love, if it means anything, eventually has to become action. She opened her banking app, adjusted the recurring transfer, checked the memo line, and turned the screen toward me. "For Jake's college expenses." New account. Same amount. $1,650. Then she set the phone down and said one word. "Done." I looked at the screen longer than I needed to. For the first time in 4 years, money meant for me was actually going to reach me. I called Malcolm Grant from my car outside Grandma Margaret's house. Professor Sato had written his name on the sticky note in my wallet. Certified financial counselor. Family estate specialist. 22 years in practice. Those titles would have meant very little to me a month earlier. At that point, they felt like categories of oxygen. I did not need someone to be outraged for me. I needed someone who understood the shape of what had happened and could tell me where the edges were. His office was in a narrow building near downtown Chicago, between a tax preparation firm and a dentist with frosted glass on the door. It was not impressive in the way people design offices to impress clients. No polished conference table. No wall of frame nonsense. Just shelves, files, 2 chairs, a desk, and a man who looked like he had spent years watching families turn money into evidence of who they really were. He had reviewed the binder for 20 minutes before our appointment. When I sat down, he did not ask me how I was holding up. I appreciated that. Instead, he opened the green section and tapped the first memo line. "For Jake's college expenses," he read. Then the next. "For Jake." Then the next. for Jake's tuition and school costs. He looked up. This is important. I figured the memo lines mattered. They matter a lot, he said. Your grandmother designated these funds explicitly for your educational support. The fact that the deposits went into your parents' joint account does not automatically convert them into your parents' money. I let that sit. For days, my father's voice had been rehearsing in my head. Household expenses. Family support. Misunderstanding. Accounts get complicated. Malcolm Grant closed that door without raising his voice. The intent is documented, he said. The repeated designation is documented. The pattern of redirection is documented. What you have here is a diversion of gift funds. He said it like a category, not like an accusation. That made it cleaner. Is it recoverable? I asked. He leaned back slightly. That depends on what you mean by recoverable. Civil court is an option in some situations, but family cases like this can become expensive fast. The bigger question is what your grandmother wants to do now that she understands what happened. She changed the account. Good, he said. That stops the ongoing harm. Then he rested one hand on the binder. But this also raises estate questions, access questions, trust questions. If your parents redirected money this clearly labeled, your grandmother needs to review every financial permission she has ever given them. That was when I understood the binder was no longer only about college. It was about the entire system that had allowed my parents to turn my name into a spending category. Malcolm gave me 2 names before I left. The first was Ruth Okonkwo, estate attorney. 17 years handling family trusts, diverted gift funds, beneficiary disputes, and the kind of financial damage people try to bury under the word complicated. She is not for you first, Malcolm said. She is for your grandmother. If your grandmother wants to review access, authority, accounts, beneficiaries, or anything your parents have been allowed to touch, Ruth is the person I would call. I wrote the name down carefully. The second name was less dramatic, but maybe more directly useful. A financial counselor at the university's Student Services Office. Malcolm said I should retroactively document every educational expense I had covered myself while designated support money was being redirected elsewhere. Tuition gaps, books, housing deposits, emergency technology costs, transportation. Any hardship applications I never filed because I did not know support existed. I'm not promising money appears, he said, but documentation changes what people can ignore. I understood that sentence. By then, documentation had become the only language in my life that did not flinch. I put both names in the binder. Ruth Okonkwo. Student Services. Not revenge. Not a plan to destroy my parents. Just doors they had spent 4 years making sure I never knew were there. 2 weeks after Grandma Margaret changed the account, my parents threw me a graduation party. I want you to understand the timing. 2 weeks after she had sat at her kitchen table with the black binder under her hands. 2 weeks after she had seen the green deposits, the pink charges, the blue transfers, and the yellow expenses my parents would eventually try to call normal family costs. 2 weeks after my grandmother quietly redirected the first honest dollar I had received from her in 4 years. My parents booked a private room at Oak Brook Country Club. 32 guests. Buffet dinner. Open bar. A framed photo of me in my cap and gown near the dessert table. A navy and gold banner that said congratulations, Jake, like the room had been assembled by people who had always been proud of me in the same direction. They invited Grandma Margaret. That is the part one still turn over in my head. I do not know if they thought she had not spoken to me. I do not know if they thought she knew, but would stay quiet because older women in our family were expected to value peace over accuracy. Or maybe they had simply decided that the best way to control a story was to get in front of it with lighting, catered food, and 32 witnesses. My mother called twice that week to ask what time I would arrive. Both calls were bright. Too bright. She asked if I wanted the chicken or salmon option, whether I had a photo from graduation she could print, whether I was bringing a jacket because the club could get cold in the evening. Not once did she mention Grandma's money. Not once did she ask why Margaret's transfer had stopped going into their joint account. My father texted me the morning of the party. "Proud of you, son. Tonight is about everything you built." I looked at that sentence for a long time. Everything you built. He was right. Just not in the way he meant it. My father gave the speech after dinner. Of course he did. Alan Mercer had never met a room he did not believe could benefit from his interpretation of events. He stood near the dessert table with a champagne flute in one hand and the framed graduation photo behind him, positioned perfectly so anyone looking at him would also see me in a cap and gown. My mother stood slightly to his left, smiling with both hands folded in front of her dress. Natalie was near the bar, holding a glass of white wine and checking her phone like the evening had already become longer than she expected. 32 people quieted down. My father smiled. "I want to say a few words about my son." My son. The phrase landed differently now. Before the binder, I would have heard pride in it. Maybe ownership in the harmless way fathers sometimes claim their children's accomplishments because love makes them clumsy. Now I heard accounting. "Jake has always been independent," he said. "Even as a boy, he didn't need much pushing. He understood early that nothing valuable comes easy." People nodded. My uncle raised his glass. My father continued. "In this family, we believe in hard work. We believe in discipline. We believe struggle teaches a young man what comfort never can." There it was. The old sermon. Cleaned up for guests. He talked about self-reliance, about perseverance, about how proud he was that I had put myself through difficult years and come out stronger. He said men are made in seasons when no one is there to carry them. My mother dabbed at one eye like the speech had touched her. I stood near the back of the room, hands in my pockets, listening to my father accept applause for a version of my life that had almost broken me. He did not mention the library shifts. He did not mention Miller's table. He did not mention the computer lab, the apples, the coat, or the nights I stayed awake doing math no son should have had to do while money with his name on it passed through his parents' account. He raised his glass. "To Jake," he said, "for becoming the man we always knew he could be." The room clapped. And Grandma Margaret slowly stood. Grandma Margaret did not stand quickly. That was what made the room notice. She rose with both hands on the table, slow and steady, the way older people move when they are not asking a room for permission, but giving it time to understand that they are about to speak. My father turned toward her with the smile still on his face. It did not last. "I'd like to say something," Grandma said. Her voice was warm. That was the dangerous part. Not sharp, not shaking, not angry enough for anyone to dismiss as emotional. Warm. The room softened around her immediately because everyone expected a grandmother's speech. Something sweet, something about pride, something that would make my mother cry in a way she could enjoy. Grandma looked at me across the room. "I am very proud of Jake," she said. "He has worked harder than any young man should have had to work, and that has been clear to me for years." A few people nodded. My Aunt Laura smiled. Natalie looked up from her phone. Grandma continued. "That is why I was happy to help. I'm glad the $1,650 I've been sending every month helped you get through school, dear. The room changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. It shifted the way ice shifts before it cracks. A fork touched a plate and stayed there. My cousin Miles looked at Grandma, then at me, then at my parents. Aunt Laura's smile thinned into confusion. Natalie's face went still. My father's hand tightened around his champagne flute. My mother looked at the centerpiece again. Same move. Same flowers. Same hiding place. But this time I was ready. I looked at Grandma Margaret and said, clearly enough for every table to hear, "I never got it, Grandma." A small sound moved through the room. Not a gasp yet. More like 32 people taking in air and forgetting how to let it out. Grandma did not look surprised. She looked sad. That told the room everything. Slowly, one by one, people began turning toward my parents. My father stepped forward before anyone could ask the next question. That was his instinct. Control the room before the room starts doing its own math. "Jake," he said, using the voice he reserved for tense family conversations and sales calls with difficult clients. Calm, measured, reasonable enough to make anyone else sound unstable if they answered too quickly. We talked about this. We had not. Not once. My mother's eyes moved toward him, then away. My father looked around the room like he was offering everyone the courtesy of an explanation they were too confused to request. "There has been a misunderstanding with the accounts," he said. "Margaret's money went into the household account, and household expenses supported Jake while he was in school. Food, insurance, utilities, travel, all of that adds up." It was almost impressive. The speed of it. The way he tried to turn 4 years of diverted money into parental budgeting. The way he said household expenses as if those words could cover wine bars, golf supplies, Natalie's transfers, and a $429 wine fridge purchased while I slept in a computer lab. Several people looked relieved for half a second. That is how badly families want explanations. Even bad ones. My father must have seen that little opening because he stepped into it. "Jake has always been very independent," he continued. "Sometimes he misunderstands what support looks like because he expects everything to be direct." There it was. The pivot. Not theft. Not redirection. Not my grandmother's money. My misunderstanding. I reached down beside my chair and picked up the black binder. I set the black binder on the nearest table. Not hard. Not dramatically. Just flat enough that the sound of it landing made the room understand this was not something I had brought by accident. My father looked at it, and for the first time that night, his face lost its speech shape. "Jake," he said quietly. I opened the binder. The first tab was green. "Green is Grandma Margaret's deposits," I said. "Every month. On or around the 15th. $1,650. Memo lines included." I turned the first page so the closest people could see it. "For Jake's college expenses. For Jake. For Jake's tuition and school costs." Aunt Laura leaned forward. My cousin Miles stopped pretending not to look. "There are $61,000 in records I could access directly," I said. "The full 4-year pattern totals $79,200. No one spoke. Numbers do something in a room that emotion cannot. Emotion can be argued with. Numbers just stand there and wait for someone to prove them wrong. I turned to the pink tab. Pink is luxury spending that happened within days of those deposits. My father's jaw tightened. I kept going. Nordstrom, Lake Geneva Spa Weekend, wine bars, restaurants, golf supplies, a wine fridge. Someone at the back of the room whispered, "A wine fridge." I did not look up. The wine fridge was purchased 4 days after one of Grandma's transfers. That was the same week my laptop died, and Dad told me computer labs were what they were for. My mother put one hand over her mouth. Not in shock. In containment. Then I turned to the blue tab. "This is money moved to Natalie." Natalie's head lifted. Until that moment, she had been watching the binder like it belonged to someone else's disaster. I read from the page. Apartment deposit, Subaru down payment, credit card payoff, Breckenridge ski trip, transfer labeled Nat help, another labeled Natalie move. Natalie's face changed slowly. Color leaving first. Then certainty. Then something close to understanding, but not enough of it to help anybody. "My Subaru," she said. Not loudly. Just enough for the room to hear. I looked at her. Yes. Her eyes moved from me to our parents. "My apartment deposit?" "Yes." She stared at the blue pages like the paper had personally betrayed her. Maybe in a way it had. For years, she had lived inside a version of the family where help simply appeared because she needed it. Now she was seeing the source printed in blue ink, stacked in front of 32 people. My mother still could not look at her. My father said, "This is incomplete." I turned to the yellow tab. "Yellow is household expenses," I said. "The part you were about to hide behind." That stopped him. "These are real bills. Utilities, groceries, insurance, repairs. But they were paid in the same cycles as money Grandma specifically designated for me. So even the cleanest version of your argument is that you used money meant for my education to subsidize your household while telling me there was nothing available." The room was completely still. I closed my hand over the binder ring. "You called it support," I said. "The records call it redirection." My father looked around the room and found exactly what he had lost. Privacy. You could see him reaching for it, trying to pull the whole thing back behind a closed door where his voice was bigger than everyone else's and mine could be managed into silence. "This is a private family matter," he said, "and I think we should all take a breath before." "No," I said. One word. Calm. Not loud enough to be called disrespectful. Not soft enough to be ignored. My father stopped. I looked at the champagne flute still in his hand, then at the framed graduation photo behind him, then at the room full of relatives and friends he had gathered to hear his version of my life. "You gave a speech," I said, "in front of 32 people, about self-reliance, about hard work, about how struggle made me a man." No one moved. "So this seems like the right room." My mother closed her eyes. My father's mouth opened, but nothing useful came out. For once, the room did not belong to him. It belonged to the records. Grandma Margaret had been quiet while I opened the binder. Not passive. Quiet. There is a difference. Passive people disappear from a room because the conflict is too large for them. Grandma Margaret stayed fully present, hands folded around the top of her cane, watching every face as the evidence moved through the room. My father looked at her then. That was his mistake. I think some part of him still believed she was the same variable she had always been in his version of the family. Older, polite, generous, uncomfortable with scenes, willing to let younger people make a mess as long as everyone agreed afterward to call it complicated. "Margaret," he said, softening his voice, "you know we would never intentionally." She raised one hand. He stopped. Not because he respected her. Because everyone was watching. Grandma reached into her purse and took out her phone. My mother's face changed first. She knew. Maybe not exactly what was coming, but she understood the category of it. Her eyes went to the phone, then to my grandmother's face, then down to the binder, as if the pages might tell her where to stand now that the floor had moved. Grandma tapped the screen once. Then again. The room was so quiet I could hear the call ringing. Once. Twice. A man answered. David, Grandma said. It's Margaret Ellis. My father went still. I had heard David Rosen's name before. Estate attorney, 34 years in practice. The man my grandmother used for her will, her trust paperwork, and anything involving assets she did not want handled casually. Grandma's voice stayed warm. That was what made it devastating. I need you to close the joint access arrangement with Denise immediately. Yes, today if possible. My mother whispered, Mom. Grandma did not look at her. I also want a full review of every account, asset, authorization, and co-signed obligation connected to Alan and Denise Mercer. Anything they have access to, anything they have been named on, anything I have allowed them to touch. Someone near the back of the room inhaled sharply. Grandma continued. And I want to begin the process of removing them as beneficiaries from my will. That was when the room finally gasped. Not one person. The room. 32 people understanding at the same time that this was no longer about embarrassment. This was consequence with paperwork attached. My father's mouth opened. No words came out. For a man who had built his whole authority on explanations, silence looked unnatural on him. David Rosen's voice came through the speaker, calm and professional. Understood, Margaret. I'll begin immediately. Thank you, she said. She ended the call and placed the phone back in her purse. Then she looked at my parents. Not with rage. With accounting. The same kind I had learned the hard way. You used my grandson's name, she said, to make theft feel like parenting. No one answered. There was nothing left in the room that could protect them. I picked up my bag. That was all. No speech after Grandma's call. No final accusation. No demand that my parents admit what everyone in the room had already heard, seen, and understood. The binder was still open on the table. Green. Pink. Blue. Yellow. For colors holding 4 years of my life more honestly than my parents ever had. I walked past Natalie first. She was still staring at the blue pages, one hand near her mouth, looking younger than 26, and not innocent enough for that to matter. I did not stop. Whatever she was realizing belonged to her now. Cousin Miles touched my arm lightly as I passed. Not to stop me. Just once, like he wanted me to know somebody had seen it clearly. Aunt Laura stood near the bar with her glass forgotten in her hand. Behind her, 32 people remained frozen in the careful silence of witnesses who understood they had just watched a family story become evidence. My father did not call after me. Neither did my mother. Maybe they were too ashamed. Maybe they were already planning the version they would tell later. It did not matter anymore. I stepped out of the private room and into the country club hallway, where the carpet muffled my footsteps and the air smelled faintly of polish and expensive flowers. Outside, the evening was cool and clean. I did not look back. There was nothing in that room that required another look. The truth was already standing where everyone could see it. Color-coded. Time-stamped. Printed in 3 copies. And impossible to explain with the word misunderstanding.